So where did we stop? You remember? I think on page 5, isn't it? We stopped at
right before the last. The last side.
no true worldview.
Nature of God is revealed in Islam.
Yeah. Okay, but we haven't explained the one before, isn't it? We didn't say anything about jigsaw puzzle or anything, right? Okay, let's start with the I propose from after development and progress. Because with the 9 elements, we stopped at happiness, and then we let us say at the beginning of the page, or in near the middle. I propose here in this introduction. Okay.
I propose here in this introduction to give a gist only of some of these fundamental elements of the worldview of Islam. A comprehensive statement of their nature is already set forth in the chapters of this book. It is these fundamental elements of our worldview that we maintain to be permanently established that modernity is challenging, seeing that the shifting systems of thought that have brought modernity forth from the womb of history, fathered by the forces of secularization as a philosophical ideology. But as a matter of fact, modernity or post-modernity has itself no coherent vision to offer that could be described as a worldview. If we could strike even a superficial similitude between a worldview and a picture depicted in a jigsaw puzzle, then the jigsaw of the modernity is not only far from depicting any coherent picture, but also the very pieces to form such a picture do not fit. This is not to mention post-modernity, which is already undoing all the pieces. No true worldview can come into focus when a grand-scale ontological system to project it is denied, and when there is a separation between truth and reality and between truth and values. These fundamental elements act as integrating principles that place all our systems of meaning and standards of life and values in coherent order as a unified system forming the worldview. And the supreme principle of true reality that's articulated by these fundamental elements is focused on knowledge of the nature of God as revealed in the Quran. The nature of God as revealed in Islam is derived from revelation. We do not mean by revelation the sudden visions great poets and artists claim for themselves, nor the apostolic inspiration of the writers of sacred scripture, nor the illuminative intuition of the sages and people of discernment. We mean by it the speech of God concerning himself, his creation, the relation between them, and the way to salvation communicated to his chosen prophet and messenger, not by sound or letter, yet comprising all that he has represented in words, and then conveyed by the prophet to mankind in a linguistic form, new in nature, yet comprehensible, without confusion with the prophet's own subjectivity and cognitive imagination. This revelation is final, and it not only confirms the truth of preceding revelations in their original forms, but includes their substance, separating the truth from cultural creations and ethnic conventions.
Since we affirm
the Quran to be the speech of God revealed in a new form of Arabic, this description of his nature therein is therefore the description of himself by himself, in his own words, according to that linguistic form. It follows that from this, that the Arabic of the Quran, its interpretation and tradition, and its authentic and authoritative usage throughout the ages establishes the validity of that language to a degree of eminence, serving to describe reality and truth. In this sense, and unlike the situation prevailing modernist and postmodernist thought, we maintain that it is not the concern of Islam to be unduly involved in the semantics of languages in general, that philosophers of language find problematic as to their adequacy to approximate or correspond with true reality. Conception of the nature of God that is derived from revelation is also established upon the foundations of reason and intuition, and in some cases upon empirical intuition, as a result of man's experience and consciousness of him and of his creation.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah, we continue reading from the Prolegomena to the Metaphysics of Islam by Sayyid Muhammad Naqib Al-Attas. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with the understanding of his knowledge. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to shower his blessings upon him. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cause us to benefit from his knowledge, inshallah. So, as we discussed last week, Professor Said Nakib Al-Attas has identified 9 elements. Yes, 9 elements, which is being challenged by the dominant worldview deriving from the West today, whose core, that's the core of the dominant Western worldview today, is the belief, the metaphysical belief in change, development, and progress. And of course, these conceptions of change, conception of development and progress has been in the Western consciousness for a long time. Yes, they have spoken about natural change from the times of the ancients. Yeah, and from, let us say, millennia, more than 2,500 years ago. One of the things that is that Aristotle in his Metaphysics find astonishing about change is that, well, he distinguishes between what is called the sublunar realm and that which is beyond. The world, as we described before this, in the understanding, in the Aristotelian notion, undergoes change, but that which is beyond does not. That which undergoes change is seen in several things. It is seen in the certain organisms that undergo metamorphosis, like the frog, isn't it? It is in the beginning. What is its form? Before the tadpole, it's like bubbles, eggs, isn't it? And then it metamorphoses into the tadpole, which lives in water, and then eventually it lives on land. So metamorphosis is something evident from the eye, yes, that is observable. There is also generation and corruption, which is also perceivable amongst the trees, some animals, as well as in human beings, isn't it? You see from the period of infancy to adolescence to adulthood until eventually progressing towards old age. Yes, and then after generation comes corruption. You see it in the changes of the seasons in the year. So with the and of course certainly there is change in day and night, yes, and change in time. So many of these things that human beings who contemplate will perceive there is change, yes, and progress. However, one of the elements of Greek philosophy includes the cyclical view of time, that somehow everything comes back again, isn't it? Based on their notion of generation and corruption, everything will come back again. As the seasons come back, everything will come back as if it is permanent, like that. Of course, this has the bearing on their conception of history also. Remember, because Greek philosophy derived from Greek mythology, and Greek mythology is where the Greeks was at the age in history in which they believe in the stories of the gods and in the human or in the anthropomorphic notion of the gods. And so, and they gradually banish the gods from their conception, some of these elements remain. Yes, the anthropomorphic human character in the sense of will is removed, but in the sense of energy, in the sense of the basic notion of change, it remains. So out of that is derived the notion of naturalism. Yes, the idea that there is something called nature. And from there is also, of course, they philosophize, they contemplate about this basic notion that comprises nature. This is what occupied their minds. Yes, if you read the history of the pre-Socratic philosophers, like the Ionians, from which the Arabs translate the Yunaniyun. Yes, the Ionians were a group of philosophers, including, of course, some of the early ones like Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Protagoras. All these philosophers, Protagoras was a sophist, but the rest of them, they were contemplating what is the arche, what is the basis of reality. Some of them said perhaps it is water. As Heraclitus thought it was fire. As fire as a burning principle. That's the basic makeup of reality. And change is something constant. And Heraclitus used to say, you cannot step in the same river twice. The other extreme is taken by Parmenides. He believed in truth there is no change, there is only permanence. Yes, there is only illusion of change. Yes, And then furthermore, of course, as you read, when Aristotle inherited this history of cosmology and history of metaphysics, he had opinions of his own. But basically, the contemplation about change is a basic makeup of Western idea. Gradually, of course, it is only in more recent times, let us say in the past few centuries, that they began to contemplate on the notion of evolution. Yes, and what later became evolutionism. Yes, with secularization. Yes, we need to say the emptying of nature from any supernatural elements came also this notion of evolutionism, because in the human imagination that wishes to liberate itself from the control of religion, what it would take is for somebody like Charles Darwin, and even before that, they already were thinking along those lines, like Thomas Malthus on the principle of the survival of the fittest. So they were thinking along those lines about geological change and so on. Gradually, they collapsed the notion of the cyclical view of time to a linear view of time, and of this linear view of time, it became defatalized. Certainly, because if God is now gone, those who would think seriously about this would imagine a world in which constant change is the reality and permanence is loss. Yes, the loss of permanence. Everything is in the state of the here and now. And certainly what this does is that it separates between the realm of facts and values. Yes, the separation between facts and values. Because facts, as they perceive in nature, have no value component. The fact of nature is that things come into being and things go out of being. Things, when people are born and people die. Yes, and organisms, basically have no internal, as we said about the evolutionist worldview last time. Organisms have no internal telos. Telos is basically the Greek notion of something aimed at. Yes, in Aristotle, and including amongst the Muslim philosophers who translated and developed his ideas, they believe in a teleological world, that everything that happens for a reason. Everything that happens tends to something. In other words, in the teleological worldview, or the teleological conception of the world, they see that the oak, the acorn, has a tendency to become oak trees, and human beings has a tendency towards what we may call symptoms of psychic well-being. And in order to achieve symptoms of psychic well-being, you require some sort of living, which is the ethical living. So Aristotle, at the very least, in the Aristotelian conception, you have to be good to be happy. Yes, you have to be good to be happy. So basically, there's no separation between values and reality. And truth and reality is also likewise not separated. So look at how modernity has progressed to the extent that they managed to decouple between these very fundamental things. So the decoupling first between truth and values, and then the decoupling between truth and reality. What's the difference? What does it mean when we say there is a separation between truth and values? Well, first, truth is something. Of course, they have a theory for everything. Yes, because they have what we call the cumulative experience with the university system. Amongst the philosophers, there are three major schools, let us say, contending, yes, to describe what in reality is truth. There is a correspondence school, yes, that believes that for a statement to be true is for that statement to correspond with external reality. Then there is the coherent school. The coherentists believe that for a statement to be correct is for the statement to be internally logical, meaning to say for the statement to not suffer internal contradiction. So basically, they adopt a mathematical attitude, meaning to say statements can only be true if, yes, they can be clearly and distinctly put forth without internal contradiction. Yes, and then there's the third group, the pragmatic school. Well, the pragmatic school They say truth is, what is needed. If supposing you are in front of a cliff, yes, and then either you jump or you don't, yes. Of course, if you don't, you die, isn't it? Because you have to get across. If you jump, either you will fall on the other side, or you will die. It is better for you to believe that you will jump and you will survive, isn't it? In the hopes that you would survive. Yes. So it becomes pragmatic. And so truth therefore changes with history. As values change, isn't it? They like fashion. What was true in the 70s is not true in the 80s and the 90s and so on. And in the US especially, pragmatism is the foundational philosophy. But in Europe, amongst the English speaking, the analytic philosophers, they prefer to adopt the coherentist picture of reality. What is the consequence? On the other hand, even if you adopt the strongest school, the strongest position, which is the correspondence school, what statements can you claim for yourself? Those statements that can be claimed for themselves are statements which can be verified empirically. And this is because towards the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, amongst the English-speaking Europeans, including the Vienna Circle, yes, they adopted this notion of verificationism. Verificationism became the standard criteria of meaning. Meaningful statements are only statements. So basically, this is what they said. Meaningful statements. Sorry, today is a bit philosophy full. Meaningful statements are statements which can be verified empirically. Like, a statement, all swans are white. That's an empirical statement. That's a statement that can be verified empirically or falsified. Yes, either way. So that's a meaningful statement. But on the other hand, if a person says, the world had a creator, how do you empirically verify that? Or it does not have a creator, how do you empirically verify that? Well, you can use, let us say, arguments as to what they call inference to the best explanation. Yes, that's our favorite form, inference to the best explanation, isn't it? What is inference to the best explanation? Meaning to say that there's this inductions, a collection of inductions that we have done. As by istiqra, we say, well, by induction, we know that things do not spring from nothing, and so on and so forth. They built these arguments. Either ways, yes, they claim at least that God cannot be empirically verified. But the problem is not the fact that God cannot be empirically verified. We can accept the fact that God cannot be empirically verified. The fact is their reduction of meaningfulness of a statement to that which is empirically verified. Yes, but they didn't realize this themselves, or they might have realized it, but they kept it in their universities, or they kept it as a criteria, and they promote it, they promulgate it until amongst themselves they recognize how useless this criteria is. Like, first, some of them tried to challenge this. The proponent of this school, they call the verification school, the Vienna Circle, the mouthpiece was a 24-year-old philosopher at that time. Yes, Alfred Jules Ayer. He wrote a book called Language, Truth and Logic. In that book, basically, he tried to expound this criteria of meaningfulness. So somebody may say, well, supposing we say behind the moon, at that time they haven't arrived at the moon yet, nor do they have the kind of equipment allow them to reach there. So they say, well, supposing somebody say there are mountains behind the moon, how can you empirically verify that statement? They cannot. They could at that time. Does it mean it's a meaningless statement? No, clearly it is a meaningful statement. But then he said, well, when they were attacked like that, they responded by saying, well, even though it is not empirically verifiable, we can think of something that would verify it. Well, until somebody starts asking, well, how about that very statement? Can that very statement be empirically verified? That statements are meaningful, yes, insofar as they can be empirically verified. How do you verify this verificationism? How would you do that? What sort of a thing can you do to verify the truth of that statement? So it collapses upon itself. Yes. Nevertheless, yes, this type of movement, as the Vienna School and beyond, led the general public to an empiricist type of worldview, as denial of metaphysics and so on. Eventually, there is then just the raw change, development, and progress as the core business of reality. Is that other? I didn't realize my battery is almost done. Okay. We can pause this. For those online, sorry, I'll have to log in with another number, inshallah. Thank you. I'll come back.
Okay. All right.
Notion of naturalism, evolutionism, rationalism, and all these ideas about basically that would lead to the dahr. Yes, I think basically the dahriyun, that's what they are. Yes, and Prophet Allah calls them the hunal aniyun. Yes, from huna wal an. Yes, hunal aniyun. So it is just here and the now. And we have explained to you how from the criteria of truth, they managed to basically exclude everyone else from their discussion, let us say, and they pursue that. And that is why Professor Nakib Akhtar said here that modernity is challenging our permanently established elements, because the forces that brought about the forces that brought about modernity is secularization as a philosophical ideology. Can we imagine modernity without secularization? What is modernity? Well, modernity is merely, they say, via moderna. It's a new method in philosophy. But there is also a more serious discussion on the nature of modernity by Habermas, yes, of the Frankfurt School, in which they try to situate the idea of modernity in this, or before Habermas, let us say, in Max Weber, said that modernity has to do with the rational development of society. It's rational development of society. When they basically, when they organize society on the principles of economics and rationality, as opposed to the previous principles deriving from religion. Yes, there are other things that are metaphysical in nature, which became changed with the notion of progress, profit, yes, business. These have now changed society. So it comes together, yes, modernity. When you look at modern nations, one of the things that happen is the changes in social roles, changes in gender roles. So basically what modernity does is that it removes anything which is permanent to that which is functional. And that which is functional is reduced to that which is profitable. So that's modernity. And it was fathered by secularization as a philosophical ideology. So basically what pulled society from the womb of religion into this modern world where everything follows the principle of profit and principles of the here and now, productivity, innovation, and whatever it is that they call about this constant need for progress, is secularization as a philosophical ideology. As a philosophical ideology, certainly it had its ideologues, and some of them were political ideologues but others were pure metaphysicians, and yet some others were more concerned about economic progress and so on. But nevertheless, they joined together in their hadaf, in their interest, in their intention to develop society. So modernity is fathered by secularization as a philosophical ideology, and so they have no coherent vision that could be described as a worldview. How can they have a worldview? Isn't it? Because change is the basic substratum. Yes, development and progress. Progress is the basic substratum. It's a scary world to be in. You might find something, as we described last week. Your values might have to change over time. One of the examples, we're not necessarily judging, let us say, that in America, yes, there is a difference between America before and after Martin Luther King. So basically, it took a generation of courageous people, to fight for their rights and equality. But you would have still, a group of people amongst the elder generation who would still maintain or retain their previous ideologies, yes, of racism and so on, and they would still remain, I suppose, what they describe, people who are sexist and so on and so forth, reflecting their basically the earlier ideology that was not, let us say, consumed. Yes, that was not consumed by the more dominant ideology, which basically influences society. So therefore, those amongst them who wishes to change society, those who bank upon the notion of development and progress, they would be active in trying to disseminate their thinking. They would be active in trying to influence, especially the student body, because they know that supposing if you're able to influence the youth of a particular generation, that could, if it does not leave a long-lasting contribution, then at the very least you are able to change a generation of people. And supposing you start speaking to 16, 17-year-olds or young 20-year-olds at the universities, and you plant into their minds the notion of equality, as the equation of equality as justice, then this generation might be fighting for that, or until they are 40 or 50, until that basic ingrained idea becomes removed. Yes, so you see now the moral debates. Yes, the moral debates that happens today is the result of what was planted, say, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because those who would be 20 would now have been 30, and some of them 40, and when they rise up in the ladder of power, they are able to basically shape the world into their mold. But they have no coherent vision of worldview. In fact, in order to placate, in order to calm their hearts, what do? They have a separation between subjective and objective ideology, or rather subjective and objective belief. Subjectively, within the confines of your home, you can believe anything you want. You can have any religion you want, so long as in the secular sphere, yes. So long as in the secular sphere you adopt you adopt the principles of this unspeakable God called society. That's whatever society deems. So, but those people know this is a facade, yes, a facade and a facade. Yes. Why do they say that? Because they know that if you are loud enough, if you are intolerant enough, if you are, charged up enough, you can change that. Yes, and that's what they have been doing. Yes, and they present the narrative that they wish, because this is the thing, as Professor Nakib Alata said, if we can strike a similitude, yes, a superficial one, a similitude between worldviews and jigsaw puzzles. Yes, already with modernity, the jigsaw puzzle no longer fits, but they had to live with that. But postmodernity is already undoing everything, because at the very least, in the modern era, when they were, let us say, fresh into this evolutionist worldview, they still had this belief in progress. They still had this belief in this notion of material progress and human beings getting to higher and higher levels of existence. But with postmodernism, that narrative has collapsed. Now, postmodernism challenges the very notion of a meta-narrative, meaning to say that there is no grand story to things. There is no ultimate end. Yes. What is even more amazing is that the Quran captures all these meta-narratives of mankind, including those who claim there are no meta-narratives. Yes. What are the Dahriyun about? Yes, these modernists and the postmodernists. Well, since they cannot speak of, whereof they cannot speak, they must remain silent, according to Wittgenstein. Since they cannot speak of metaphysical truths, since they cannot speak about what would be conducive to man's happiness, since they cannot speak about man's metaphysical origin or metaphysical answer, since all of this is not on the table, what then is that? Well, John Paul Sartre said, we're condemned to be free. Condemned to be free. Yes. Mal'un. How are they condemned to be free? Because they say existence precedes essence. Human beings are born with existence. Okay, existence is a given. But what you do, who you are, you have to choose. Yeah? And the only, or rather the biggest burden for yourself is to choose what kind of a living would be proper for you. And, Albert Camus dramatizes it further. He said, that in truth, in philosophy, there is only one fundamental question you need to ask yourself. Why shouldn't I take my own life? How did it get to that? From Aristotle, yes, who was at least thinking about the, happiness, reality, unmoved mover, like something like his own conception of God. They had so many things going on, isn't it? 2,500 years ago. And then there was the period of Christianity. And then now, why shouldn't I take my own life? Is the fundamental question. Existence becomes something which is absurd. It is an absurdity for them. And so therefore they consider, they write very brilliant descriptions of their tragic life, some of which are written in forms of play, and others are written in the form of, let's say, dramatic novels. There is one which I thought was, insightful as to their existential crisis. It's Sartre's No Exit. It talks about this a man who dies, and in the afterlife, he didn't realize he was already in hell, but because hell looks like a hotel room, then there's a butler who brings him inside the hotel, and then in this room he's stuck with several individuals. Basically hell in summary is being stuck in a room with people you don't like, and basically this man, the protagonist, he cannot stand the eye of judgment from one lady there. So basically he's not free. He's ever in hell. So basically this description is what Sartre tries to convey, the notion that any attack on your freedom, yes, any attack on your authenticity is basically an attack on your essence, on your freedom, let us say. They are playing, isn't it? مثلهم كمثل الذي استوقد نارا فلما أضاءت ما حوله ذهب الله بنوره والله takes away their light. And so that they're grouping in the dark like that. So that's modernity and postmodernity. And then that's in essence, Prophet Allah said that their problem is the separation between truth and values and separation between truth and reality. So truth and values, I hope it's clear. Meaning to say, their epistemology will not grant them any values. Yes, because as we described just now, based on the empirical criteria, correspondence criteria, coherent criteria, how can you come up with a way of living that can reveal to you this is true, this is false? As for Muslims, it is clear, isn't it? What is haram is false. Yes, it is clear by Muslims living the life of ma'asiyah. I mean, as we have memorized in some of the aqidah, I think the aqidah of Sakran, I suppose, that mentions that the best kind of life is taqwa Allah wa ta'atih. نعم ومخالفته. So al-khair is it's a value statement. So the best of the dunya and akhirah is in the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obedience. And shar, evil, is in living a life of disobedience. Yes, it's clear, isn't it? So our truth and our values are not disconnected. Yes, once we discover, the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reality of ourselves, the reality of our covenant, it's clear. But for them, what they discover by truth will not afford them any values. Can you imagine? Can you think of anything that would assist them to give them values? They tried with cross-cultural anthropology, but what would that afford them? Cross-cultural anthropology merely affords them basically a survey of what the other peoples are doing, and this group of people seems to be happier than others. They say that, and then they try to come up with their own theories. Why this particular tribe in this particular region in the world, why they are happier than others? And they say, well, maybe because they work only 4 days a week or something. They try to theorize, but they never get at the root of the problem because they were not able to look into themselves. Cross-cultural anthropology does not afford them the answer. Neither can neuroscience. Oh, this particular activity seems to increase the dopamine levels to such a high degree. Well, they say, okay, then maybe we should have more of such activities. But you keep doing that until it leads to depression. Then they say, well, so since humanity, but once they exhaust themselves with human subjects, they say, well, maybe we should look at the monkeys. The monkeys seem to be happier than human beings. Maybe we should have, we should live like they do. Have more bananas. Or something like that. Well, hasil, that the truth, how can truth afford them values? It's a dichotomy now. Yes, what will it be? Can you help them and try to provide what sort of a candidate? Where can the candidate be? You see, these groups of people now, with their advanced technology, can think about how to have a space mission. They can think about how to photograph distant planets. They can think about that, isn't it? Oh, well, maybe we improve the curvature of the spaceship. Maybe we just bring a drone. Maybe we do this, we do that. They can think of many things to solve that kind of problem. Maybe we can even solve global warming. We can do this, we can do that. But this basic fundamental question of truth and values: can you discover a value which is also true? True love is the answer. For 3 days, maybe. They meet the person of their dreams. They call the soulmates. Well, the soulmate might wake up one day thinking she's in the wrong body. She was a she. She wakes up, now she's a he. Or a day. So basically, truth and values are totally separate categories. And the other one, which is more fundamental, is that truth and reality is also a major problem, a major conundrum. Because what they describe as true look at these 3 schools just now. The pragmatics, the pragmatics certainly are, will not afford you what is real, what is also real. Because but yet it helps spawn an entire industry. Yes, the industry of self-help books is based on the pragmatic notion of truth. You can be anything you want. In 5 steps, I can teach you. That's the result of the pragmatic school. Tells you can be anything you want. You can do anything you want. Basically anything. Yes. So that's the pragmatic school when it comes to true and real. But many people fall for them because it is in the nature of the nafs and hawa to believe that you can do this, that, without recognizing limits. In truth, there are limits. The coherentists and the correspondence school can also not afford you what is to the arrival at a theory which is also real. So therefore, what have they restricted themselves to? Truth is therefore a property of statements. Truth is a property of statements. Yani sidqul qaul bas. They cannot arrive at hakika. They say, for all we know, for all we know, we could be, brains in a machine. For all we know, yes. For all we know, and how many people watch The Matrix thinking it's true? Yes. For all we know, all of our previous memories were installed by a group of aliens, whatever, For all we know, they say all these things, isn't it? They started this imaginative enterprise with Descartes. Imam Al-Ghazali didn't go that far, but Descartes did. You said, what if there is a demon, like a jinn, a very powerful jinn? He creates into my mind. Yes, he creates into my mind that I'm in this body and I have all these beliefs. Mashallah. Then Descartes said, well, how do I know that everything that I know is not correct, is not suspect? Or then Descartes heroically said, well, if I doubt, if I doubt, that means there's thought. If there's thought, then I exist. This cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Is that all you can establish? Children can establish that they exist. They say, how do you know you have a hand? Or you have a pair of hands? Take them out. Halas, isn't it? But for them, we have to philosophize. In the end, these are unbridgeable. It becomes unbridgeable, truth and reality. What is even worse is if Muslims thought that if we follow the West, if we aid the West, we're going to be as progressive as them. It's a surprise, welcome to our tragic world. Yes. Truth and reality, and truth and values. No true worldview can come into focus when a grand-scale ontological system to project it is denied. And when there is a separation between truth and reality, truth and values. So we have, I hope I've explained this properly. So fundamental elements act as integrating principles that base all our systems of meanings. Now, Professor Naqib Al-Qassam, so yes. We might not feel, especially those of our brothers who have been fortunate to have been brought up by the worldview of Islam and in Islamic societies, we might not feel it, yes. But those who, I suppose, have had this experience of, the real, some of them, they might not have been conscious of this tragic reality. They might have been distracted all their lives. But if one of them wakes up to this, yes, the separation between truth and values, and the separation between truth and reality, yes, then they will recognize how valuable the Prolegomena is, how valuable this group of concepts are. So Prophet said, the fundamental elements act as integrating principles that place all our systems of meanings and standards of life and values in coherent order as a unified system forming the worldview. And the principle and supreme principle of true reality that is articulated by these fundamental elements is focused on the knowledge of the nature of God, as revealed in the Quran. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Haq, yes, meaning Al-Haq is one of his names. He is the true as well as the real. All these other concepts that follow, yes, also are all true and real. So when you study fiqh, yes, you study that which is true and real. When you study aqidah, you study that which is true and real. When you study tasawwuf, you study that which is true and real. And also at the same time good. As al-khair. As when you say khair, you mean really al-khair, al-khairul mahad. You don't mean by them, it's a khair for the previous generation. You don't mean by them it's khair if you look at it from this perspective. It's not perspectival. It is not gender-based. It is not all these things. Yes, some of them, they like to doubt, and they create doubt into the minds of Muslims. They say, well, look at our minds. They say, isn't it possible that we are mistaken with many things? How do we know that these truths are truths? But alhamdulillah, if we have these integrating principles, we have that which is stable. Should we do more? Well, it's already 3:25. Maybe on Revelation we'll do next week. So we do a round of reflections then, inshallah.
I just made some notes. Yeah, you mentioned that this will be a philosophical heavy episode.
Mhm.
And you mentioned also the various worldview and concepts within society that has been changing all the time. What we are dealing and facing with now is unprecedented in maybe last century, that's the last millennium. Could it be, and I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but all these changes, could it be that this is perhaps a fabricated program or a tool planned by a few those that themselves have a steadfast, non-changing worldview to continuously subdue the masses throughout history to fuel and sustain their own worldview? I mean, to say all these changes over the centuries are actually tools to target the masses in order for them, their own steadfast, non-changing worldview, can you imagine who, to keep these people subdued and busy with things that are actually trivial, if you look at it, because in the context of Islam, hakika, this is all we have to focus on and not be distracted with all these concepts that people deal and have to face with over the centuries. And as a result, we then will have to position ourselves, the scholars of Islam. I mean, Islam, the Muslim become a target also of these tools. We have to position ourselves in such a way that we would then have to protect the new generations every century for whatever tool has been launched or
Well, we're not yet at what Professor Nakhid Alatas is now dealing is in the realm of ideas.
Yeah.
But in the realm of power, it's a different subject. There are philosophers, especially amongst the European, as well as in the States, like Michel Foucault, who made his entire life project the study and the study of structures of power and how to basically who might be behind such structures, or rather how such power is perpetuated. Some of them they explain that the basic makeup of the modern nation state and its various agencies is designed in such a way to subdue the masses, certainly, and then to concentrate power in the hands of the few. But who are these few? And, this is another question. But the study of the various methods of how this is perpetuated is important, I suppose. To study the institutions of why is there similarities? Why are there similarities between the factory, the school, and the prison system? That's that should be something that concerns us. Why do they adopt similar patterns? You have the bell, the bell, and then you have something. Early on, somebody by the name of Jeremy Bentham, is in the UK, one of the utilitarians. He used to be the mentor of John Stuart Mill. He envisaged something like a panopticon. This panopticon is a prison built in such a manner that there would be an overseer in this, such that in theory he can be there or not be there. So this was before the days of the camera, certainly. So he can be there or not be there. But the people inside the prison feel as if they are being seen all the time. And so this notion of the panopticon is integral, let us say, to the prison system. And they basically introduced this notion of prison not as a place of punishment, but prison as a place of reform. So basically, the gradually it permeated into other institutes in society. You have children going to school, and you give them the same diet. You go to the hospitals, and you have the same. And of course, some of these philosophers, they contemplate. What about the very concepts? Seeing that we live seeing that for those who contemplate seriously, for them, that values and truth cannot be connected. Why is it that there is a stable value that we have to live by? Why are some values stronger than others? So they try to dismantle what we call the social ontology. And why is it that although those of them who reflect like that, without say the assistance of revelation, arrive that basically it's my values against yours, but why are some of these people have large concentrations of powers, and why are the rest subdued like that? The instruments of subduing the rest is clearly seen, as we see. But as to what purpose and to who to gain, these are separate matters. Which is why, once we contemplate this seriously, which we will understand why Professor Naqib Atta said we should not waste our energies on the labyrinths of legalism and trying to change things politically. Because politics and the legal labyrinths of things, these are not the proper source of change. If you wish to have positive change in society, you would target education and its contents. Education and its contents. In other words, you would have the principles of the metaphysics of Islam as the foundation of your education. Can we have that? Yes. Can we have that? Meaning to say, because only the metaphysics of Islam, it's now, I suppose it's established itself. Yuriduna liyutfi'u nurallah bi'afwahihim. Yes. They try to cover the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their tongues. Wallahu mutimmu nurih. Allah will certainly complete. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will certainly manifest His light despite their hatred, or in spite of their hatred. And then Allah said, or rather in the same surah, it is said, He is the one who sends His messenger, with guidance and the true religion, Adin al-Haq, comprising the metaphysical elements, certainly, so that it becomes manifest over the rest of the rest of the systems which are taken as religions by the rest of the people. Because what is comprised in the conception of religion for the rest includes tools for the effective control of society. That's for the benefit and for the enjoyment of the few. So it becomes manifest over the rest. So if that is the case, you would prioritize the contents and its dissemination as the contents of the metaphysical elements which are unchanging. And if you can maintain that freedom to do that, then you still have a lot. You still have a lot to do. Otherwise, then we can see in the coming generations a more creative and elaborate means of controlling you. A more creative and elaborate means of controlling you. So you have had the panopticon with Bentham, and then the tools have been improved and have been more sophisticated to fit into the modern national agendas, including the notion of authoritarianism and the notions of let us say what is described in the dystopian novels like 1984. Yes. So therefore, but why? Why do they improve? Why do they keep improving themselves, wanting to control? Because of course, if you do not have the proper metaphysics, if there is no God in your system, then there is just hawa, there is just desires, isn't it? And what are some of the hawa of the people? Those who have had a taste of wealth would want a lot more of it. And if there is no limits of haram, they will certainly exceed the limits. Those whose dunya comprises power will want more of it. And those whose dunya involves fame will want more of it. And imagine amongst those, yes, whose whose true aim is power, that would include power over others, isn't it? So if they study these tools effectively, they would be wielding such powers, and they would control society under them. They would use, and that is the lesson in the Quran. Yes, as we look at the tyrants of the past, who was Fir'aun, who was Namrud, who was Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab. These were people whose minds are more developed than, let us say, the rest of their community, but their spirits were not, let us say. Because in their minds, the rest of the community would be pleased if they have enough to get by. But some of them, they wish to be king or to have power. And so certainly they will work with anyone that can advance their desire for power. What we see in modern times is merely a magnification of that ability. Yes, a magnification of that ability using bureaucratism, using technologism, and using several tools which are now at their disposal, which was never imagined by the people in the past. In the past, they had to use effective tools of propaganda, but now propaganda is mixed with the most advanced technology. Even the panopticon is nothing compared to the CCTV and the other means to control people's speech and people's thinking and so on. So either you want to buy into this narrative, which would make you feel ablas, which will make you feel depressed, or it is better to do what you can, basically in acquiring true and right knowledge, and to practice your knowledge, and then to spread da'wah. I would say it is ilm suluk da'wah. That's the most effective method.
Because we can say we are the people of the metaphysical, whereas the others they are waging a constant struggle with the physical. So does that mean that one way is obviously through content and education to wage the response from us towards this world that we live in is through education and content, addressing these things, making these things clear to the people that hey, you need to be aware that this is ongoing.
Yes, and at some point it might, I suppose, involve courage also. Certainly, because once you stand by the truth, then the people of falsehood will see that you are a threat to them.
They are with power and they were with force.
But look at Fir'aun and Musa.
Yeah.
Inshallah. Reflection.
This concept which actually is played with knowledge. Even the Muslims, we say the thing FYN. The Muslims using it every Muslim. They use it as pet. In fact, alhamdulillah, I had opportunity to teach with many of the university students have this kind of detectives. And actually, they are being pressured into this kind of things. Of course, for us Muslims, we know that there are certain things we question, we are skeptical, but not everything we skeptical about. And until it becomes nucleus. So for them, they laugh, this is the thing that we have to such. Things like, for example, like theory of evolution and class is accepted. And if you look at it, the only things that their capital, they rely upon small things, like for example, how bacteria progress from one strain to another strain. So this is the beginning of evolution. But other than that, easily argue that no real basis. Islam, like you said, for us Muslims, things are clear. Although, alhamdulillah, even someone who is born Muslim because he is in this question, it's always push on us every day. People always push. Like you said, even the people here are looking to Western progress, thinking that we should follow them, we should mimic them, that we can reach a level of progress. And some of the Western told me this Western progress is more like no lady, but where she becomes. So we look at it as beautiful, but in reality, she's a no lady. I believe alhamdulillah, for this day and age, because we are posed with this kind of question, we really need to understand this kind of text that we will take.
One thing that is that for those people who talk about controlling the masses, then the philosophical ideas are going against the Muslims. Metaphysics. So they can't control the masses unless the masses accept their philosophical ideas. So the Muslims themselves, the masses, how they think, what brought them to think that Islam is against progress. How does Islam go against progress? We had a time in the Muslim world, the Muslims were in progress, they discovered stuff, they made things which were not built. So how did the Muslims nowadays, the masses, not those people on top, and so what makes them think that it can't come together, it cannot come together, Islam and progress?
Okay. Well, the matter of technological progress. So we have to be clear what is meant by progress, isn't it? The problem with these conceptions, when you say development and progress, we have to be clear. We have to have a clear conception. What is progress? There is progress in taskhir, in the sense that the world becomes more and more habitable due to the development of technology. And this is not blameworthy. Yes, in the sense that you progress in the medical sciences as a result of, trial and error, observation, imaginative solutions of say, problems of sicknesses and so on and so forth, ingenious devices being invented and so on, new schemes to organize, let us say, wealth and so on and so forth. These we do not consider blameworthy, yes. But what is problematic with their notion of progress is that if progress is meant to include the metaphysical aspect element just now, if it means change towards acceptance of false metaphysical theses like naturalism and rationalism and so on. So that's our response to progress. But to the question, why is it that the Muslims are lagging behind in the natural sciences, in the human sciences? Well, first and foremost, we haven't done the first step, which is to Islamize the sciences. To Islamize the sciences would include, first and foremost, to impose the right ethical limits on scientific practice. Just to impose the right ethical limits on scientific practice. But what do we mean by that? We cannot equate every single change as progress. So we say, in cosmetics, if you are more able to refine the makeup at the cost of experimenting on animals, we say, no, keep the animals, isn't it? That's ethical limits. Imposing limits would also mean that we will not enter into certain researches that would involve unethical behavior, because our religion imposes such limits. Second, and furthermore, we can also say that we would have priorities. Yes, if we are the ones involved in the scientific enterprise, between, say, space exploration and ending hunger, which one is more prior? Ending hunger, isn't it? So like that. So it doesn't mean that one of the false notions that this metaphysical program of progress tries to put into our minds is the belief that there is no limits. In fact, there are limits, and the limits is in the prioritization. Because if you do this, that would mean you're not able to do that. If you do this, that means you're not able to do that. So the worldview of Islam, on the other hand, with its let us say established scheme of values, have something like the maqasid of the Sharia, what we would prioritize over the others. Now, even after we have dealt with this discussion properly, that we have criticized the notion of change, development, and progress properly, we have criticized the metaphysical foundations of modern science and so on and so forth, there's still, your question is still a valid question. Why are the Muslims not developing themselves technology that would be to their assistance? Yes, that would be in line with the requirements of the worldview of Islam. And the answer is because their knowledge framework is in shambles. Yes, because they haven't understood the proper requirements of the conception of knowledge in Islam. And we know that the conception of knowledge in Islam, as Imam Al-Ghazali has laid out in a beautiful framework in his book of knowledge, would involve the society in collective struggle. Yes, that Imam Al-Ghazali has already set out that the society, members of the society would pursue, first and foremost, the fardu ain. Yes, this is beyond question. Everyone has to have the degree of fardu ain which is sufficient for themselves. And then at the level of fardu kifayah. Now, at the level of the fardu kifayah, is it a requirement of society that everyone should study until they reach the station of mufti? No. Yes. And in fact, perhaps their talents might not allow them to reach there. You know, maybe some of them will study for 30 years and not progress beyond the the regular books. Or they read this book and the first book is lost. They dabble in nahu and their figure is lost. So khalas, that would mean that there might be some other fardu kifayah that you can solve better. If we have reinstated the framework of the fardu ain and the fardu kifayah better, and we do not eschew the natural sciences, including the sciences of medicine, we shouldn't say that I am a graduate of religious sciences and I'm superior to you. We shouldn't develop that idea, because as Imam Al-Ghazali said, what about a city, an entire city of fuqaha, semua faqih belaka, but you do not have one couple, so the one who can perform hijab, then the whole city is blameworthy, like that. So the misallocation of talents is the reason behind our inability to progress properly. But this misallocation, the more prior requirement is the proper framework of the philosophy of science. Once we have a proper framework of the philosophy of science and a proper re-evaluation of the sciences of religion, we would introduce a different, because once the hadaf is different, the methodology would also be different. One of the things that al-asaf has happened in some of the madrasah systems is that they have let us say abandoned, or if not abandoned, then they have neglected the development of the rational sciences alongside the religious sciences, even though they still teach the ilmul alat, like the grammatical sciences and mantiq, but they no longer teach what was learned, or at the level that was learned by the earlier generations, especially when we speak about the quantitative elements of the ilmul alat. The qualitative elements are still preserved. The rhetoric aspect, the grammar aspect, the morphology aspect, yes. Nahu, saraf, balagha, this is well maintained in order to be able to understand the fiqh books. But mantiq, have they developed mantiq to go beyond to go beyond benefiting from the books of usul, and to go, meaning both the usulain Have they developed their mantic so as to be able to serve them in the affairs of psychology, for example, in psychology and study and psychology and sociology, not necessarily from the Khaldunian let us say direction, but from the Tasawwuf direction. By now we should be able, if we have a concentrated effort, to develop Tasawwuf into a curricular system in schools. But that's yet to be done. We need to see how to instill proper values in children until they grow up to be good men and women. And then now if we can reinstate the natural progression such that we do not stop at the trivium, but we progress to the quadrivium. We need to say after the linguistic sciences, they learn also what used to be learned in mathematics. Well, maybe, I don't know, some of them say we can mathematics, arithmetic, astronomy. These sciences were mastered by the early generations. So with these tools, you will, the tools in quantity will assist you greatly in the more demanding aspects of the material world. So once you have that, then it's more likely that you can develop this narrative of progress. So first you have to get the metaphysics right, the conception of education right, then you have to have a group of right teachers, and it will take several steps, but it is not impossible, but it is not something that cannot be done. Then of course, then the task of changing the opinions of the masses, that's another subject.
You said something about Professor opposite post-secularism. Post-secularism is philosophical.
So we need not oppose secular states, but we must oppose secularization as a philosophical program, because secular states need not necessarily promote secularization as a philosophical program, because secular state is a possibility in the West because of their own development in history, in that they had the church versus the let's say the king controversy, the church versus the state. And their notion is that either it is a theocracy or it is a secular state. But for us, this is not a dichotomy, because we know that Muslim kingdoms have flourished in several different forms, and so therefore, even with the modern nation state, it is not necessary that we must, let us say, dissolve everything and return to the notion of other forms of state that might be in agreement with us. What we need to focus upon rather is the challenges that attacks the heart and the mind. Okay. Yes.
Because secularism continuously changing. So the state, once they said, we state the state is done. So basically it's clear that they are pulling. But secularism is like this process at the end. So one day with this thing, then it's this thing. When it moves against the target.
And then furthermore, when you look at the secular states, there are several models. The secular state is not one state. We know, let us say England and the US have different conceptions of the secular state. France has another conception of the secular state. So these are secular states. Yes, but it is not impossible that within a secular state, there is one that can support the principles of Islamization. What do we mean by that? Well, if they respect the right of religion, say freedom to religion and freedom to organize yourself, that's all we need. Yeah. So he said not necessarily opposed, but there are certain instances in which the secularization as a philosophical program is the official ideology of the state. In that case, grave danger.
How about controlling? I can't be like that.
What?
Felt like I was being controlled my whole life. Especially at the school, in prison. That makes sense. Exactly the same. On the beds. And the other one was the nafs, the money and the power. I didn't understand. See, the thing is, when people who are rich, billions and billions and billions, they don't want to share a single one. They lose that whole billion. That's suicide. I never understood that. Billions. No, I mean, it's just people go do. Didn't understand. And actually, something happened to me when I was very young. I felt this. I mean, why they did that. So I had like $20. It's really, it's really basic. I was like, oh, I do so much. I went, I ate for a whole week. I was eating the wrong. I was like, oh, yeah, this is nice. And my money went up. I can't do anything. So I was like, next month I'm gonna save up like 5 months and I'm gonna start eating. So I did that the first month. What's happening? I can't eat this month. Now I'll be eating with my friends. So I did that. When they asked me, do you have money? No, I don't have money. I had it in my pocket. So you know what I mean? So I felt that, that's kind of felt that. I experienced smoke.
What happened? Yeah, and this is the religion that teaches you, how to basically first it gives you a framework, what is right and what is wrong, and then eventually it helps you overcome that. I remember hearing from Sheikh Mukhtar, he was telling about there is this notion of what we call the nafs al-lawwama. It's the self-censoring soul in Islam. In Islamic psychology, you have states of soul or levels of soul, degrees of the soul, the lowest of which is the soul that inclines towards evil all the time, towards corruptive behavior. Then a person may progress until you reach a stage of self-censoring, lawwam. Meaning to say, when you did something wrong, you felt like, why did I do that? Or you feel a struggle in yourself. Sometimes the army of good wins, sometimes the army of evil wins. And in some human beings, with the proper knowledge and with the proper training, meaning to say, if he has good teachers and he practices his religious practices and devotion, he may progress to the stage of the nafsul mutmainnah, the soul at ease. Now he is at peace with himself, he's always doing good. And then there are high levels, of course. Now, in Western psychology, on the other hand, that self-censoring soul, is described as, based on whatever theories that happens to be popular. Yes, they say that, well, you need to feed that. Yes, it's because it was repressed in your childhood. You need to let it go. You need to let it out. Like so on, like Freud and so on, because they have no standards to judge that. Yes, and they make. I mean, the humanistic ones amongst them, the psychologists will say, well, you cannot really develop that desire for money or for wealth, because it would lead you to the loss of friends, and so that's why some of them, they build something like a pyramid, like the Maslow's hierarchy. So what Maslow does is that he said, well, at the lowest development of your psyche, you desire simple things like food, and then eventually you recognize that friendship, companionship is higher, and until you get to what is called self-actualization. So they teach you this, saying that you tolerate, you tolerate not having a lot of money because you win friends. You tolerate not having a lot of money because you can keep a family. You tolerate not having a lot of money because you can have children. But there is no real basis to this, because that's why they have the problems of alcoholism, the problems of other types of behavior. Because supposing a person now, if he goes by what he feels, a person may decide, well, I don't mind not having friends. I don't mind not having a family. And some of them, in fact, make it a life principle. They say that I'm not going to marry. I'm not going to have children. They say that because there is no guide for that. Because they go ultimately by their heart. And this, psychological counsels, the counsel of the psychologists will not do anything to them. Because they say, no, ultimately I'm the decider, isn't it? And some of them, what if they develop psychopathic and sociopathic behavior? Is there anyone that can tell them otherwise? Or is there anyone that can teach them how to escape the darkness of that alley that they're going down on? And supposing, you feel like if you, and that's why, you have these problems, alcoholism, predatory behavior, sexual predatory behavior, and so on and so forth. And in more recent times, it's now come up to the surface of society with social media and so on, such that people who have power, they recognize that this is now the time for them to liberate that predatory behavior that otherwise they would not do. Yes, this is the story from 2,500 years ago. It's called the Ring of Gyges in Plato's Republic. There was a shepherd. He used to work for a man. He was poor and thin, and he used to get his pay from his master, let us say. So one day he discovered while he was shepherding this ring that if he would turn it inwards, it becomes invisible. And invisibility affords him invincibility, isn't it? Because if no one knows what you're doing, then you're free to do whatever you want. Yes. What does he do? He kills the one who pays him, and he does his thing with the wife. Now this is the reality of morality in the separation of truth and values. Everyone is good so long as they're not caught. Everyone is good, yes, unless they're not. Everyone is only as good as what the law affords them, isn't it? So long as they remain within what is legal, they're fine. And that's what they do, isn't it? They say that the only thing that's preventing them from murdering another person is the force of the law. And that's not how you live, isn't it? That's why they develop new terminologies, isn't it? New terminologies like bribery can be repackaged as whatever they want to call it, isn't it? So bribery is wrong, it's illegal, but political gifts, something else. Yeah? Facilitation. They call many things. Bribery is wrong, but lobbying is something else. And so it becomes a naming game. Yes, they name something so that it's not wrong. It's wrong to commit atrocious behavior. It's wrong to commit genocide over an entire people. So you call it defense war. Yes, but the other group you call them terrorists. Yes, and so on and so forth. So basically it becomes, so they control language, yes, in order to afford their nafs whatever their nafs wishes to do, and they have a stern narrative, isn't it, against this. But these are people of falsehood.
I just have a clarification. You mentioned two things: truth, values, morals, and truth and reality.
Yeah.
So reality is the external world, two hands, change seasons. And I believe the truth is a collection of
it's a property of statements.
So like I think before I am, like that. I guess
Okay.
and values is that which people decide on for that time and everything. It might change over. Okay. And that's all. But I wanted to say, because thinking about last time here, I'm gonna be leaving next week. I want to say this is the most amazing philosophical talk I've had. Because these last 3 hours like total, he hit the heart of the issue, which is what most of the world and the Western world has lost in change, development, and progress. to keep on trying to figure out the right answer, but it keeps evolving and changing with the times, you know? And what they think is right is their opinions, which obviously change with the times of the generation. And in the last talk, we said Islam doesn't have that. It's solid from the beginning. And all it does is just keep blossoming the more you learn about it, you know? It's not changing. And so that was awesome, great to me because, you know, when you read philosophical books, you want to go to you know, read all these great minds. I could have been stuck on that edge for another 4 years. I'm like, yeah, what is the very best solution, you know, philosophically? But the problem is that everything keeps changing. That's the problem with this Western or, you know, philosophy is that it keeps changing. Their philosophy is changing. But Islam is no, we got the essence of nature, human nature, and the nature of the world and God's attributes. That's the essence. You can develop technology and all this, like even now, like develop. See that I remember Bertrand Russell says something very funny to me. He says, "The promise is we develop human beings. This is we're developing technology at rapid paces, but people are still safe. You know, we develop transportation, teleportation. We used to have a food that could just be in more places at once, you know." And so I want to thank you so much for these 2 classes I've been to, because it just went straight to the heart like a bullet. Now we could just not build my foundation of philosophy and Islam based on this.
It'll be streamed weekly, no? Like, I think you'd be, what, 8 hours behind, Kareem? Seattle is what, how many hours
It's
behind?
10 hours.
So it'd be 2 p.m., 2 a.m. So
Yeah.
6:30. No,
Inshallah,
4:30 in the morning.
I record and I try to send
There you go.
Yeah.
Because me will be streaming still. Inshallah.
Just from that point, do you think that we ever reach that point of contentment within the state, even including Rasul's time? Did we ever reach a state where everyone is in the right place, everyone had the right frame of mind, everyone knew the answers?
That wouldn't be the goal, isn't it? The goal, because even in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly mentions, you know, that had he wanted, everyone would have been guided. But he has decided to whom would be given these things. So if you are given knowledge and you have been given a great blessing in your life, yes, it's true and certain knowledge, you've been given a great blessing in your life. It certainly, you know, is worth more than fame, wealth, and glory. Because with fame, wealth, and glory, and every other thing in this world, they perish. They perish together with the world. But knowledge is that component. I mean, true knowledge is that component which remains even after we leave this world. Yes, and it is the Allahu Akbar. You know, knowledge is the arrival of meaning in the soul, and the soul's arrival at meaning. And since the soul is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although it has a beginning, but it will be permanent, that which is permanent in the soul is the component of knowledge. Yes, as some of the Sufis, they say, based on the hadith, of course, they say that the entrance to Jannah is based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. The levels in Jannah is dependent on your amal, but the permanence in Jannah is based on your niyyah. And that niyyah, the foundation of niyyah is ilm. Because how can you intend something if you do not know its value? You would only intend something if you know it. So the basis, therefore, is knowledge. And if you have been given knowledge, you've been given a great good. Allah said, whoever has been given wisdom, which is a kind of knowledge that reveals to you the proper places of things. Yeah, you've been given a great good. And certainly, we should choose that over any other thing in this world. Do we have any questions from participants online? Okay, if there are no questions, then inshallah, until we meet again next week. Assalamu alaikum.